Hello and welcome to the Making It Happen podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, this is a podcast and YouTube show where I document my journey of becoming a creative entrepreneur, but more importantly, helping people start their journey to making their dreams, passions, and goals happen. And today I have a very special guest who I'm going to be talking to, Mr. Todd. This is someone who I'm truly admire and respect. He is a successful entrepreneur who's on a mission to helping people reclaim their creativity. With his latest book, 32 Regrets, a guide to reclaiming your creativity. Todd, thank you for coming on the show, man. How are you? How is everything? Hope you're doing well, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Kyler. This is awesome. And thank you for the kind introduction, man. It's great to be here. I'm so excited to chat about this with you. You know, we've had some really good conversations sort of offline. We kind of connected on the photography bit, and we've just been talking about creativity a lot, and it's really fun to chat with someone like you, who I can bounce creative ideas off of, who we can really you and I think really get into creative process and love to kind of like talk through it and figure out like what's next and how to do it. And I appreciate you putting me in the category of successful entrepreneur. I don't know that I'd go that far, but man, like you, I'm on that journey and I'm trying to figure it out every day.
You know why you're a successful entrepreneur?
Why is that?
Because you're happy with what you're doing, man. You're happy. I can see it in your face, in your posts. Honestly, man, like the more I do this, like I don't have $1 million behind me. I'm not some financially successful entrepreneur, but I'm so happy with what I do every single day that I know at the end of the day, I go to bed just content. I'm so happy with it. And that's why I want people to go on this journey of making it happen, because that's how I'm doing it. That's how I'm making it. And that's why I think you're a success, man. You're doing an awesome job.
I appreciate that. Thank you. This is, it's awesome. And I'm so happy to be here and chat with you today.
Yeah, man. No, I really appreciate it. And so on today's episode, I really want to dive into this book because I've been reading this book, man, and there's some awesome insights onto how you're making it happen, and the people you interviewed are making their life happen. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it. And maybe to kick off with my first question is, for people listening or maybe wanting to look into this book, who was this book created for, and how does it relate to creativity? As you mentioned, we talk a lot about creativity. When I, started this journey, or even before, I never thought I was creative, or let alone knew the importance of creativity in my life. So maybe if you want to touch on why you made this book and who is it for?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Really this book began as kind of a selfish thing. And it started because I wanted to know how to be a creative entrepreneur. I've been in this habit of journaling for the last, 10 or dozen years. And I have a format that I like and that works for me, but hey, different formats work for different people. And so some days I would just do a brain dump and I just write some bullet points about what happened in my day. And what I started to look at was I started thinking about it, and I felt like in every job that I had, something was missing. I wasn't giving all of myself into that role. And I started to realize that what was missing was really this creative component, like where I could just be me and I could just do like the weird things that I do and quote movies and be goofy and come up with like crazy ideas. And so what I found was in my journaling, that was actually an outlet for me to get some of those ideas out. And so as I was putting those ideas out, and kind of job hopping and working my way through my 20s, I kind of started to figure out like, wow, like I have a lot of business ideas. I want to know how to make that into an actual thing. And so I sat down, I started cataloging it, and what ended up happening is I had 32 different ideas for businesses that I had wanted to start at one point or another. And that's where the idea of the 32 regrets comes from. And that's where I was feeling this heavy burden of regret that like I hadn't started any of these things. And I tried to start one, but I was in grad school. I was sort of like behind regulatory issues. I didn't really know how to push it forward. Now I do. I know what I could have been doing during that time, but I actually don't regret that because it sort of propelled me forward to this position. So this book is for anyone who has an idea or has no idea and wants to figure out how to use their creativity to chase a passion or a curiosity in their life and to get creativity back into their life, get those ideas flowing, and start figuring out how they can put those pieces together to build a more creative life.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And guys, like when I first started or before I started, I didn't think I was creative. So what's that self-doubt that people,
Yeah.
look at themselves and say, "Ah, I'm not a creative person. Like I don't know if this book is for me." Like, do you have anything to say to that, to those people who may not think that they are actually creative?
Man, to anybody who says like, "Oh, I'm not creative," or "I'm not creative in that way," I always go back to this study done by a guy named Dr. George Land. And he worked with NASA to help NASA figure out their most creative problem solvers to get them on the teams that were mission critical for space flight. So, how to get
Hmm.
humans into space, how to get them back to Earth, how to keep them alive. So, he came up with this test to test creativity. And then he and his partner, Dr. Beth Jarman, thought, hey, well, if we can do this for adults, why don't we do this as a longitudinal study and figure out what happens to creativity over a lifetime? So
Mm.
they tested 5 year olds. They tested that same group at 10 years old, at 15 years old, and then they've tested over 1 million adults at this point. And what they found is, play a little guessing game here. So what do you think at 5 years old? How creative do you think people are? Kids are.
Probably crazy creative. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
So it's
making up
it's
animals and weather and all sorts of things. Yeah.
exactly. So it's 98%.
Yeah.
When you get to 10 years old, it drops off to something like in the 30 percentile range. By the time you're
Wow.
15, it's down to 12. And by the time you reach adulthood, it's 2% of humans that score in the highly creative range. And so there's so much stuff that happens during that time, right? You've
Hmm.
got school, you've got friend groups, you're trying to fit in, you're trying to mold yourself into a
Hmm.
specific like type of person, and creativity kind of falls by the wayside. So for anybody who says right now, like, oh, I'm not creative, guess what? You at one point were that 5 year old who was in that
Hmm.
98%. So you are creative. And everyone is born with the human brain, which is an awesome tool. And it's a great tool because it can be retrained and it can relearn. And so I think so for anyone who's listening who's like, oh, I'm not creative or doesn't feel creative, guess what? You are. You have a brain. You're here, you're listening, you're learning. That means that you can be creative. And so I think part of this argument too is that people fall into this idea that creativity is just the arts. It's just writing, painting, photography, videography. Creativity is in all manner of things in our life. It's in cooking, it's in creating and designing your own life. It's in chasing things that you want to chase, following your own curiosities, solving math problems, doing complicated chemistry equations that I'm not doing. But if you can figure out how to turn plants into fuel, like, man, that's creativity right there.
Yeah.
But I think people get stuck in this idea that creativity equals arts, and it's not always
Mm.
true. Creativity is in everything and anything that you do every day. So you are creative. So let's start from that assumption. And from that assumption, if you've got something that you want to try, like, oh, I'm not creative in that way, but I'd really like to be good at drawing, there are infinite resources out there to learn how to draw. If you have a pencil and a piece of paper, or even like the margin in a book or in a notebook or something, you can start doodling. And then YouTube is a tremendous resource for
Mhm.
free tutorials on how to learn something. The internet has endless tutorials on how to do creative things. So I
Photography.
think photography, exactly. I think if you just start thinking about it, there's a greater intuition when it comes to creativity, and you know what you want to create. And that's where I think you get into these sort of what I call the principles of dreaming, and where you really have to give yourself permission to go out and create that thing once you've identified it.
Man, you're taking the words out of my mouth right now. A couple of things that really stuck to me, what you said, like being stuck, not believing that you are creative and that we create our life, we create our routines. I mean, you gave like so many amazing examples of how we create. And when I look back at my journey and how I got to this point, I knew all along that I should have been in this field. But
Yeah.
like you said, giving yourself the permission to go into it and say that I'm going to fail, I'm going to trip up, I might even fall off the sidelines, but guess what? I'm going to get back up and keep going.
Yeah.
I knew from a very young age I wanted to be in this industry. When I look back at my life, but didn't allow myself to actually do it until my late 20s,
Yeah.
right? So what advice do you have for people in that state, right? This is podcast is all about starting the process, making
Yeah.
it happen. How did you start the process? Like you talked about 32 regrets of business regrets and ideas and things that you didn't do that ended up not being regrets, but that how did you start writing this book? How did you actually wake up and say, today's the day I'm doing it? Was it a moment? Was it a decision? Like walk me
Yeah.
through that process and maybe some tips you can share on how people can start, writing a book, starting a business, a YouTube channel, what have you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I listened to all these podcasts and read all these professional development books. And um, this guy by the name of Chris Moore summed it up really well one day. And he said, you could know everything there is to know about cliff diving. You could have, like gone diving off of a diving board. You could watch YouTube videos. You could do all this research, but you don't know anything about cliff diving until you actually jump off the cliff. And I was like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
what I started figuring out is like, okay, so I have these things that I want to do, but I have no idea how to do them. Maybe I could learn from some other people about how to do this. So again, this started as like a very selfish thing. Like I wanted this information. And I sort of started thinking, this is actually kind of cool. And I think there's a cool transformation happening here. And I think that these would be cool stories to share with people. And so the first thing I can say is there's three things that I think are really important for creativity. And the first thing is dream. And that's just, noticing what you're dreaming about, what you're thinking about, what are you wishing you were doing when you're sort of sitting at your desk. It's that intuition again. And what I like to tell people is like, if people don't really know that or feel that, it's follow your curiosity. Think about what conversations you had or what podcasts you listened to during the day that really piqued your interest, and then follow that curiosity. And I mean that in do your research, go out there, watch YouTube videos, read news articles, look at what's on the internet. And then, like the internet's a crazy tool for good and for bad, but you can reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and say, hey, Kyler, what's happening, man? I've seen your videos. I am like so impressed with what you do. Would you have 10 minutes to talk with me? And by and large, people are really, really responsive to that. And so you can start dreaming and getting curious and learning along the way. The second thing that I started doing was looking at how I was spending my time. And so, for me, I was spending a lot of time sitting on the couch at night watching Netflix. And I realized that that was time like after dinner when I could actually be doing something. And so it sort of forced a change of habit where like I would come back to my computer and try and write 1,000 words after dinner. And 1,000 words seems like a lot of words, but when you sit down and just start letting it like drop out of your brain, 1,000 words doesn't take very long, to be like really honest. And then, like once you catalog your time and you see how you're using that time, you can actually find the time in your week to go out and like actually work on a creative project. And everybody thinks you need so much time, but with like 20 minutes and a Post-it note, man, you can accomplish so much. And I think you and I have had this conversation where like, when you started getting into photography, you were giving yourself assignments to go out and shoot during the week, and then you'd edit on the weekends. And it was just that like process of carving out that little bit of time and figuring out how to do it. And you don't need like the fanciest gear, or the craziest stuff, or a perfect prototype. Like leave all that aside. If you have a phone with a camera in it, you can start photography like right now in this very instant. And you can go out there and start shooting photographs.
People can do. It's
oh my God, it's
impressive.
I look at some of the Apple ads that they use that are like the shot on iPhone ads, and I'm like, where did these people come from? Because this is amazing. Like the photographs that people are taking are insane.
I'm just gonna plug in really quick. A really cool trend that you'll like this, Todd, because you're getting into photography, is they get a pro to work on like a really inexpensive camera, like an iPhone.
Yeah.
And a beginner to work on the fanciest equipment, $5,000 red camera that you can do so much beautiful things. And you look at the comparison, and 9 out of 10 times the pro with the iPhone or like the cheap DSLR camera wins in the end. And that just goes to show just what you said. It really doesn't matter what equipment, and you can apply that to every industry, I believe, that you want to go into.
Absolutely.
Amazon didn't have millions of dollars to start with. They began in the garage, right?
Yeah,
With a computer.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing I think is you just hit it right there. Is like, just get started. If it's with a Post-it note, if it's a prototype made out of paper or newspaper, do it. I had some friends who were trying to make a golf bag, and they were trying to make a golf bag that would compete with new golf bags on the market and sort of like the incumbent vendors. And they were using the inside of like wrapping paper rolls, or inside of like paper towel rolls, like those cardboard
toilet
things on the inside of paper towels.
Yeah.
They were using those and newspaper and like duct tape to like build a prototype. And that's what they did. And then they realized, like, man, through like 10 prototypes, they were like, there's no way we could get this to a price point where we could actually compete with incumbent vendors. And so like, I think that story right there, like my buddy Dan, who created this card game called Pricestitution, he wrote out the cards that he was going to use for his card game on Post-it notes. And then he put them all up and he looked at them and was like, nah, that doesn't fit. And he'd take it down. And then he'd find some other idea to fill that spot. But, with Post-it notes and a Sharpie, you can get a lot done on a creative project.
Well, it's just like you see in all the movies, the business idea was on a napkin. They started a business off a napkin, and it really does mean something that like you can use anything that you have to start. I think that the lesson I've learned, like, I love what you said. The first step is dream, right? What I kind of did was I looked at what I was following on Instagram, on social media.
Yeah.
And I realized I'm following a lot of photographers, a lot of videographers. I really like what they're doing. Like, I had 2 buddies I went to high school with, and they started a production company, and I would like creep them all the time in an unhealthy, probably kind of way. But it was telling me I was having signs that this is something you're into. This is something you're passionate in. And like you said before, giving yourself the permission to get started, to go, because getting started is the hardest hurdle I had to overcome, because it took me all of my entire life to start, basically. Like you said, at 5, you had 98% creativity, to 10 to like 30%. It blows my mind, to 2% to when you're an adult. We're probably not even maybe we're using like 10% right now. So there's so much aptitude that we can do, right?
Yeah.
And then time, like sacrificing leisure for what you want. There is a sacrifice. I listened to a podcast with Lewis Howe, a famous podcaster, and Kevin Hart.
Yeah.
And talking about his story about, his dedication to fitness, even after his car crash. If you don't know, he had a really bad car crash, almost fatal accident. And he was in the gym working himself. And, the traditional doctors say you may not walk again. And he's here jumping and leaping and doing box jumps. And he's an animal, but he's determined. He has a dream, he makes the time, and he goes for it. There's so many amazing examples.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Another question I have for you, Todd, is around kind of motivation and inspiration, because we talked earlier before the podcast that there are times when, like, for instance, I haven't posted on my podcast since July. Okay.
Yeah.
It's been a really, really busy summer. And I was on vacation too for about 3 weeks visiting my family, where I did nothing and it felt great. But glossing over that, how do you stay consistent and stay motivated? Because this is not easy.
No.
Once you've started, now you have all these 1,000 other steps you have to take to get to where you want to go. Yeah. And every day is another challenge, and it's so easy, and I still do it. Push it over. I woke up too late. I'm not going to work out today. I'm too tired. I got a zit on my head. I can't do a video, and I make these excuses, and I know people do. What do you do to stay motivated, to keep going and be inspired? Like what is some advice you can give some people?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, so to be perfectly honest with you, you and I were talking about this. Like, I'm in the same boat, man. I've had a very busy summer as well. Um, Not only writing, promotional materials for the book, talking to people about the book, but really like I ended up picking up some freelance clients, and that's been keeping me really busy, and it keeps me away from actually creating, writing on creativity, and that's been really hard because it's always on my to-do list, and I always see, like my idea for my next articles, and I'd be thinking about my editorial calendar a lot, and then when I can't accomplish that because I'm busy with something else, I feel guilty. And I
Mhm.
think the biggest thing is you just have to let go of that guilt and know that you're going to get some free time to come back to it, but don't let it stress you out. And we
Mm.
can all make excuses for like, I woke up too late. I can't write today. And you know
Yeah.
what? I found that in writing the book, I actually wrote a lot of the book by talking through ideas. So I would record
Mm.
myself on a voice memo, and I'd say like, "Oh, this thing that Sheena said ties into this other thing," which really
Mm.
comes down to this idea of, and I could write a lot that way. And so when I was commuting to or from work, um, I could actually get through about 700 or 800 words at a time. And then you just have to edit it and shape it up, and you know what? It actually looks pretty good then. But
Mhm.
I've been on this little bit of a creative break, and I've actually been working on an article about how to come back from a creative break, because creativity is really a
So
habit,
tough.
and
So tough.
it's so hard if you get out of your routine to get back into it, because like you said, you can always come up with a reason like, no, like my voice is a little hoarse today, I can't record.
That's
And
been
you're like,
this week in a nutshell for me, man. It's been that
exactly.
but it's so true. It's like I feel like I'm starting the process all over again, and I'm
Yeah.
feeling that those fears of
Yeah.
starting, those
Yeah.
fears of failing, and even fears of being successful too. Like
Yeah.
what is, you know, just to interject really quick, I met my idol this summer, Gary Vaynerchuk, and I was so nervous. And I only met him for 4 minutes and 13 seconds. That's exactly how long time I had with the man. He's a busy guy, and I got some clout out of it. You know, people started following me, and people reaching out to me asking for life advice, and I felt this almost responsibility to perform, and
Yeah.
it almost crippled me. It almost
Yeah.
like, what if I post this as it's not as good as what people are now following me about? And getting back to that starting position, just like what you're saying,
Yeah.
it's such a real factor in every part of our lives, whether it's work, it's personal relationships. I mean, I see it intertwined with so many things. Sorry, I had to interject really
Absolutely.
quickly
No, no,
there.
no. And yeah, I saw that you met Gary Vee, man. That's awesome. I think the biggest thing, and the biggest thing that I like to tell people is just, I come back to this idea of always choose curiosity over fear.
Mhm.
Like, are you more curious to find out if you can be successful at this than you are afraid to fail? And I feel you so much on that right now, because when I took a break and was writing for other clients and had to come back to my own creativity, and I was like, what am I going to write about? What am I supposed to write about? Like, what am I doing here? And I started thinking about this idea of the creative break, because that's essentially what I've had from my writing on creativity, is this creative break to go do something else. And it's also creative and also fulfilling, but it's in a different way. And so now I came back and I was like, what happens when you take a creative break? And
Mm.
you're absolutely right. It's so hard to come back to your creativity, because you end up, with those fears of, is this good enough? Does this meet my standard? Is this what I was doing before? Or am I going to be so successful at this that like I don't even know what the ramifications of that look like? But you have to choose curiosity over those fears and just get back into it. And it sort of comes down to like just getting started. Um, and so what I've done is, I started writing this article about taking a creative break and things that I've done to get me back into it. And I write in the book about this thing that I call setting a trap for creativity. And it's the methods that I saw that creative entrepreneurs were using to bring creativity into their lives. And for a lot of them, it was going for a walk. For some of them, it was how they structured their day. For one of them, it was driving race cars, which would terrify me, but somehow that gives him clarity. Um,
To
It's
each
not
your
for
own,
me.
man.
To each your own. But, I would say that think about what helps you bring creative and get into that creative state. And for those of you who aren't sure what a creative state is, it's where you feel like doing something. Like if you're sitting on the couch feeling antsy while you're watching Netflix or, TV, you're in a creative state. So
Mm,
take that energy, turn off the TV, and follow that curiosity. Ask yourself, like, why am I antsy? What on Instagram that I just saw piqued my interest? Why did that pique my
mm,
interest? And I would say take a blank sheet of paper and just set a timer for 20 minutes and just write. Write about why that thing intrigued you, what happened, what energy you're feeling, because that's creative energy right there. And it's looking
mm.
for an outlet, and you can find that outlet. And that's really how I got started with this, because I would sit at my desk at work, or I'd come home and I'd watch TV, and I would feel this nervous energy about me and I didn't know what it was.
Mm,
And when I sat down and started journaling, I started to realize that it was creative energy that needed to get out. So if you're in a place where you need to get started again, think if you need permission from anybody in your circle. Like, do you need permission from a significant other, a partner, your
mm,
family to get started? And ask them for that permission, because
mm.
that in and of itself sometimes frees you to go do what you need to do. Um, so that's kind of the best way I could sum it up for people.
That's so. I love what you're saying. I'm fired up right now. I'm like, let's get going. It's
Absolutely,
so
man.
so true. Like I wish we had that conversation when I started, and I could have got permission long before. But yeah, like my girlfriend was a big part of me getting that permission. I what I like to say on the podcast is I didn't own a camera the first year I was a photographer.
Yeah.
I did not own a camera. My girlfriend had a camera. It was hers. I used it. I was working in the creative space. I used my works camera. I literally used and exhausted everything around me before I actually bought my own. And it's amazing, like how that you can use anything around you to do that. And I got the permission from her. So I love the advice, getting permission from a loved one, family member, a friend, whatever it might be, to let you go do that thing.
Yeah.
And coming back to this time thing, this is something that I've been trying to figure out too, is whenever I'm stuck, I'm not sure about something, I put a timer. And I want to know what your thoughts are about accountability. Like having that timer is like you need to have something within 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Kind of have that
Absolutely.
urgency, right? And my boss says this, and I love this quote. He says, accountability is the laziness vaccine. So when you're feeling, yeah, it's good though, right?
Yeah. It's real good.
Yeah, I have to quote him for that. But so when you put that timer on,
Mhm.
you are accountable to yourself to make something and just write or just film or just do something. And even if it's not your best work, you have accomplished something, you've learned
Yeah.
something, right?
Absolutely, man. And I'm a huge proponent of actually putting stuff in my calendar. And like, I think like a lot of people these days, especially working from home, Zoom meetings, being virtual, like live and die by the calendar. Um, and I think one of the things that I've learned is I schedule time in my calendar. And I
Mm,
actually saw this. One of my buddies, Dan, who I interviewed for the book, actually uses his calendar and sets a timer for 90 minutes, and that's his like creative time. And he just says,
mm,
all right, cool, I'm going to come up with ideas during this time. And then if he finds an idea, it goes into honing and sort of like ideation around that idea. Otherwise it's just him coming up with the sort of blank slate of ideas. But I think in terms of accountability, set that time for yourself. Really, like,
mm,
you're going to feel energized, you're going to feel amazing, and that 20 minutes is going to feel like it goes by in an instant. Like, you're going to snap and that timer is going to go off. And I do this a lot for myself. Like, I'll set deadlines, even though they're internal deadlines, like I don't owe them to anybody, but I set that deadline so I have that. Maybe like I work a little better under that edge of pressure, where I like set myself up and I'm like,
yeah.
oh man, I got to get this done today, like this has just got to happen. And you end up actually, you even if you're not feeling it, you end up creating something.
Mhm,
And like we were talking about with the photographic assignments, and saying like, I'm going to photograph lines this week, and then you look at everything and edit your photos on like a Saturday afternoon, let's say. you will have gone out and gone through that process. And you might say, man, I only got one photograph that I'm really proud of out of this. What did I do differently on this one? And you can learn from that. And I just
Mm-hmm.
think, holding yourself accountable, because you never know where a creative project is going to lead. When I sat down to write this book, I thought I was going to have all the answers leaving writing this book and go out there and start a company and just, get after it. And I learned that maybe that's not exactly the route that I was supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on other book ideas right now. I'm writing a lot, and it's not exactly where I wanted to go, but sometimes you end up somewhere better than you think you're gonna go. So really take that time, make that time available for yourself, because the only person I think that you're doing a disservice to and not making that time is yourself.
I love that. You brought up something and you said you made a deadline for yourself to make something, right?
Yeah,
When you first started, you brought up that, oh, I thought it was going to be a huge success right away. And I think everyone falls into that trap. And I still, I think at a low level, when I post something online or give it to a client, there's expectations that you may not know you're forming of like, will they, I hope they like it, or maybe I'll get some more followers from this post, or there's the expectation of success,
yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
as you know, when you start something and how long the process is, how far that really is, and we define success in the beginning of this episode.
Yeah,
But I want to know, like, how do you get over, you're working towards this goal every day. You're putting the time in every single day and you're not seeing the results. You're
yeah.
not seeing what you expected. What do you do when you're feeling that way, and how can someone either get over it, or what's the perspective they should be looking at when they're at that state, because now they've started and they're working at it but they're not seeing the results right away, which is 99% of the cases, right, of
Totally.
most people.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And like two quotes come to mind right off the bat when you ask me that. And the first one that comes to mind is Tony Robbins, when he said, most people overestimate what they can accomplish in a year and underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years. So
Mm.
keep going, keep posting. If it makes you feel good, if it makes you happy and it brings you that energy, keep going. Because
Mm.
at some point you're going to find your tribe and the followers are going to come out of the woodwork. And so keep going, keep pushing, keep publishing. I can't tell you how many rejections of articles that I've written that I've got from online publications, and each one sucks and hurts a little bit, but they
Mm.
each hurt less. And the second point to that, and especially for anyone who's a writer or a photographer and submitting editorial content, if you get those rejections, sometimes it's helpful to take a step back and look at other people's work who are getting accepted into those publications that you want to be accepted into. And maybe you're looking at the wrong publication, but more often than not, your stuff is good enough. It's at the caliber to be in there.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just have to tweak the way you have it formatted or the way you have it written. And so my other quote is from Eric Larson, who's written, I don't know how many books at this point, but I just finished his book, Dead Wake. And in the note from the author, he says that between projects, he reads voraciously and promiscuously, which I just loved as like two adjectives to describe reading. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
But that's how he found this story of the sinking of the Lusitania, and that's how he came up to write that book. So what I'd recommend is look at photographs from people who get submitted to these publications, read the articles, look at the content, look at what's there, because you might have to change something about the way you're working. And so I got this
Mm.
rejection and I was kind of crushed by it. And I started looking back at the articles that were really successful and had, at least, like 10,000 reads of them. And I was like, holy crap, how are these people doing it? And I looked at what they were doing, and the way they structured their intro was short, it was punchy, it was probably 3 sentences, and it had a hook right behind it. And so it got you sucked in to it. And I think what I found was, this idea and this is not my idea, this is a Marie Forleo copy cure idea, is that if you have an idea, write it out 25 different ways. Or if you're trying to publish an article or caption a photograph, write it 25 different ways and then go through it and pick the best one. Because the first one is sometimes the best idea that you're going to land on, but sometimes it's the 25th or the 28th or the 40th idea that you come to that's going to be the best way of doing it.
I like that.
And so I think there's a lot of different ways to sort of come at it. But I think if you keep, if you're feeling kind of stuck and you're not really, progressing in the way you want to, revel in that moment, because that moment isn't going to last for very long. So like celebrate that time, because it means you've gotten somewhere. And what, it's the same thing that you would think about in terms of like strength gains. Like what happens after you plateau? Start to exponentially increase again, and you get to that next level. So if you're feeling stuck right now, keep going, because from here where you're stuck, guess what? That next exponential gain is coming. And so if you just keep pushing forward, you're going to get there. And I think so many people give up give up on themselves right before they get to that next level. So just keep going.
Yeah. All I can think about is like the video games that frustrate me the most are the most satisfying ones I beat. Like if you are a video gamer or playing any sports too, like, you're losing one game after another, but you're improving each time. That win is so much more gratifying and humbling. Like you just, because you work so hard at it,
To get there. Yeah,
to get
absolutely.
there. Exactly. And that's where my mind went, right? When you're talking about that, I love that concept too, writing it out 25 different times, looking at different perspectives,
Yeah,
like seeing how
absolutely.
you can. Now, how, I have a few more questions before we kind of end the episode off, but something I'm very curious about is writing or making things for others versus yourself.
Yeah.
When I started making content, I focused on myself. I focused on what do I want to create.
Yeah.
And then along the process, right, you start to get maybe clients and you're making for other people, and you fall into, I don't know if it's a trap, but you start to realize you're making for others and not yourself anymore. And you talked about it, getting that creative rut. And I think it falls into that. How do you balance the two? Because, for us that make a career out of it, right? We have to do things for others to make,
Yeah.
money and live,
Absolutely.
and also make for ourselves because that's what we love to do. And is there a balancing act between it? Because some people, want to find that hobby that brings them joy that may not be their life, like their work life, or it may be their work life, whatever they determine. But how do you balance the two?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, and I'm still working on figuring it out. And so, I would say that I think for most working creative professionals, I think it's always going to be a balancing act. And so, if anyone out there has it figured out, please let us know. For me, it's creating for other people can be really, really creatively engaging. It's really fun. I get to work with other people, talk to them, hear their ideas, pitch them ideas, and hear what they want. And then I get to kind of blend the two ideas, like their idea of what they want and bring myself to it. And you end up with kind of a hybrid fused product that ends up really like showing a little bit of your creative side and your own quirks and sort of narrative. But it brings out the client's perspective as well. And I think that's really rewarding. But it's also not creating for yourself, because sometimes the most like deeply fulfilling things I find are creating for myself. When I'm just writing something that I enjoy writing or that I think is goofy, or like I said, quoting movies, like sitting around quoting movies with friends. Like I've got friends with whom I could talk in movie quotes for probably like hours on end without like saying a single word of real conversation.
That's awesome.
But like, that also doesn't fly on the client side all the time. But there are ways to bring that ability into your work life. And so I look at things like, I actually think that improv comedy does a really great job of bringing creativity into a scene that is like forced upon the comedians by the audience, basically. Like if you ever gone to a show where they're like, give us a scene, and somebody yells out like summer camp. So like now they have to do this whole thing about summer camp that they weren't planning on doing. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like in some ways like what doing client work is like, but you have to bring yourself to the party and
Hmm.
you have to show up and be authentic to you and bring your voice to that work. And I think that's what actually makes the work really interesting. And they've come to you looking for your specific voice. So
Hmm.
I think so much of my time has been spent trying to mold myself to other people's expectations.
Hmm.
And it's so cool now to be able to go to a client and say, this is what I do.
Hmm.
Um, and either you're going to like it or you don't.
Hmm.
And, if you're hired, they like you and they like what you're doing. So just keep doing that. But it's a different type of fulfillment, I think. And I don't know if you find
Hmm.
that at all, Kyler, but I find that, it's different.
Hmm. I'm a lot harder on myself when I'm creating for myself,
Yeah.
from a publication standpoint, because I make videos is the main thing and the number one thing I'm most passionate about. When I'm making things about me and my life and I'm the story, I'm a lot more difficult on myself versus when I'm
Yeah.
making something for someone else and I hear their story and I'm bringing their story to light. It's different fulfillments. I think is the best way of putting it because I do like it. I did a music video just the other week and it was so much fun to hear what they had to say and their work ethic and what this song means to them and then me putting my own creative spin on it to make it
Yeah.
come to life and I feel less pressure making something for someone else than I do for myself, and that's something
Yeah.
I'm trying to discover. And what I'm trying to do with Tanya is be more grateful and be more honest with myself and go through these. I'm trying to journal, which is already tough. Day one yesterday, I wrote like maybe a sentence or two. Like it's very very tough, but yeah, like I think that people sometimes think you can't make your hobby into your career and to a degree it might be true in some cases, but I think a lot of cases you can make
Yeah.
money off of the thing you love the most. But also if you're not looking for that and you just want something to do on the side, that's whatever brings you the most happiness. And that's why I said you are a successful entrepreneur, because if you're happy with what you're doing, you're already successful.
Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
think the money comes when you are at your most happiest. And that's happened with me in my life. Like clients just come out of the woodwork. I haven't even advertised or made any promotion or even finished my website. They're just coming because people enjoy the work that I do and then want to work with me, and
Yeah.
it's because I put my heart and soul into it, right? So
Absolutely.
I'm the same boat. It's like if someone has that balancing act, like they know how to do it, like let me know. I'd be down to try it. But I wanted to get your perspective on it because as someone who's also in the creative space. So Todd, I
Yeah,
honestly
absolutely.
I love that we finally had this opportunity to chat again. And the first time didn't work. We had some complications with the internet, but I'm so happy we had this opportunity to chat today. I want to ask you kind of one more question, and then I
Yeah.
want to give you the opportunity to talk about your book a little bit so people can know where to get it, know why they should get it, and why they should invest more time into you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely, man.
my last kind of question that I want to ask a lot of my guests is, what's your definition of making it, and what would you say, like some advice for people to start that process? And we touched
Yeah.
on it a little bit, but love to, as a final thoughts, get your thoughts on it.
Yeah. Well, Kyler, thank you for having me today, man. This has been a fun conversation, and every conversation you and I have, I like tremendously enjoy, and I walk away more energized than like when I came in. So thank you for having me. In terms of making it, it's really hard to define because I think everyone has their own definition and their own expectations. And I think that if you are finding something that you love, if you're creating for yourself, and if you're really know that you are doing everything that you can within your power to make that dream happen, even if that's 5 minutes, 2 nights a week, if you're doing that, keep going. And like, I applaud anybody who's out there even trying. If you're out there putting words on Medium, putting words on a blog, putting words on Reddit, putting words and photographs on Instagram, good for you. Good for trying. and just keep going, because that, if you're getting a sense of fulfillment out of it, that's all that matters. And I think when it comes down to creativity, create for yourself, because you're human. You were born with the human brain. You have that gift of creativity. Use it, because otherwise that energy is going to waste. And obviously we see that creativity falls off as you reach adulthood. Reclaim it, get back into it, because it's part of being a human. And if there's one thing that I could leave your listeners with, it's you are a human, you are creative. Don't say that you aren't creative. Acknowledge that you are, and then get curious about what you want to create and go out there and do it.
Love that. Love that. Todd, how can people get a hold of your book? You're working on an audio version. I love that.
Absolutely.
And just tell us again, like, who is this for and why they should read it, and then tell us where we can get it. I want people to buy this book and learn more about you in this story.
Thanks, man. So you can find the book at Amazon. You could also request it at any small bookshop. I'm a big supporter of local bookstores. If you have a local bookstore that you'd love to have carry the book, please let me know. I would love to get in touch with them. You can find me at ftscreates.com, fts.creates on Instagram. Haven't been as active there, sort of like we said, just been kind of a busy time. This book is really for anybody who has a creative idea, a passion, or hobby, and they want to figure out what the next steps are to taking it to the next level. And it's also for somebody who has no idea what they're creative about and wants to get started. So if you want to get started engaging with your creativity, or re-engage with your creativity with something that you used to love, I would love it if you would pick up the book, reach out, chat with me, and let's start a conversation about getting creativity back into our world, because it's a time in life where I think we need creativity more than ever.
Truth, man, just truth. And I'm reading it currently, and I love every chapter. It speaks to everything that I'm all about, everything what this podcast is about, and what this show, Making It Happen, is all about. Todd, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time, your energy. You're such a good looking guy. I hope people can see this and follow you, because honestly, man, I'm in the same. I'm fired up for the rest of the day. I'm going to get back to work, and it's going to be great. So
Tyler, thanks for having me, man. Oh, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, dude. I'm glad we got this one done.
Yeah, I know. Finally. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening to the Making It Happen podcast. I will link all of Todd's information below in the description. So please go follow him and follow his journey and buy 32 Regrets. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Until next time, this is the Making It Happen podcast. Thank you.